Chapter 83, 5th Year, January.
Crack, baby, crack, show me your real. Smack, baby, smack, it's all that you feel. Suck, baby, suck, give me your hand before you stop professing that you're knocking dead. Oh, stay, please stay.
Sunday, 4th January, 1976. Come on, please. No. Please. I said no. It's not like it's difficult. You just have to stick it in. What if I hurt you? You won't. Get James to do it. Sirius pouted. I don't want James to do it. You're much better at this stuff, Moony. Remus sighed. Sirius had been cajoling for the past 2 hours, slowly wearing him down. I've never pierced anyone's ear in my life, he said in a resigned sort of voice. How do you know I'm any better at it than James? I just do. Remus rolled his eyes, not bothering to respond, and Sirius began to grin. Come on, Moony, do I have to beg? You've been begging, Remus snorted, and Sirius gave a haughty toss of his hair. That was negotiating. He fell to his knees in front of the sofa where Remus was reading, smirking devilishly. This is begging. Moony's eyes went wide. What are you— Oh, please, great and powerful Moony, Sirius proclaimed dramatically, raising his voice. Have mercy on your devoted follower. He reached out, gripping Remus's leg with his hands. Hey, benevolent sire, for a poor and desperate wretch. Only you can save me from the awful mundanity of an unadorned ear. Only you can— All right. Remus shoved him off, standing abruptly. Sirius grinned up from the carpet. Is that a yes? Yes, fine, so long as you quit acting like a prat. Deal. The whole thing had started a few days before, when Mrs. Potter took them down to the village to find new shoes for Sirius. There would be no Diagon Alley, per Moody's instructions, even though nothing further had happened with Sirius's parents. He wasn't sure if the Ministry just didn't care enough about the illegal use of magic to investigate, or if Dumbledore was leaving it unreported on purpose. He tried not to think about it too much either way. Sirius had been ecstatic to find a pair of chunky black boots, like the ones Remus had, complete with bright yellow laces. Mrs. Potter insisted on buying them as an additional late Christmas present, even though the Potters had already done so much for Sirius that he had no idea how he'd ever repay them. On the way back home, they'd passed a group of muggles dressed quite differently from the other residents of the sleepy little town. They were decked out in ripped jeans and leather jackets, slouching against a brick wall and passing a cigarette lazily back and forth. One had startling green hair, the other had a row of shiny silver rings in the cartilage of his ear. Sirius was smitten. Mrs. Potter forbid any hair dyeing, and, counter to the way he felt about his own mother, Sirius would never want to do anything that might upset her, but she hadn't said anything about an earring. Remus used a potato in his prefect pin to do it, sterilizing the pin first. He instructed Sirius to hold an ice cube against his ear as he ran a lighter under the needle, and Sirius complied, waiting for his earlobe to go numb. It took some maneuvering to figure out the best position for the actual piercing. At first, Sirius sat down on the edge of the tub, but then Remus had to either crouch or kneel, and after a minute or two of awkward adjusting, he finally sighed. Here, just stand up. Sirius stood. Remus nudged his arm, moving him over to lean back against the sink. Long fingers brushed against his jaw as Remus positioned the potato against the back of his ear, frowning in concentration. Their faces were very close together. Sirius could count the little wrinkles between Moony's furrowed brows. He swallowed. Will it hurt? He asked quickly, as Remus raised the pin. His heart was pounding. He felt nervous, shaky. Remus paused. Well, we've numbed it a bit, but yeah, probably. He smiled wryly. Don't be such a girl. Be gentle with me, Moony, Sirius teased, pretending to swoon. They both laughed, and Remus gripped his shoulder, shaking him with a fond smile. Stay still, you big wuss. It did hurt, a bit, and it bled quite a lot. But the next morning Sirius marched downstairs with his hair mussed up for volume, flipped over one shoulder so that his new gold earring was clearly displayed. He was rather chuffed with it. He presented himself to his friends, shoving his hands into his pockets and pushing back his cloak with his elbows to make sure that everyone could see his new boots. "Muggle in sight," he said to Remus, sticking a cigarette between his teeth to complete the outfit. "How do I look?" "Like a twat," James snorted. "Like a rock star," Remus said. Sirius grinned, nearly letting the cigarette slip out of his mouth. When they arrived at King's Cross, he walked with a swagger, acutely aware of the eyes following him. They'd only made it a few steps past the barrier when Mary spotted him, clacking over in a heeled pair of turquoise suede boots that brought her up to his height. "Hiya, gorgeous," she said cheerfully, throwing her arms around his neck. Sirius smiled, pleased by the compliment. He hugged Mary back, breathing in the familiar smell of her perfume, something vaguely fruity. Her curls tickled his face, and he scrunched his nose as she pulled back, making her laugh. Mary kept her arm looped through his as they boarded the train, chattering about her winter holiday. She had 4 younger siblings, and it sounded as if Christmas had been quite hectic at the MacDonald household. As they sat down in their usual carriage, Sirius prompted Mary with questions. What presents had she got for her siblings? What sort of food did her mum make for Christmas dinner? Did any relatives visit? Hoping to avoid the inevitable moment that the subject would flip and she would ask him how his break went. He wasn't ready to talk about it yet. As it turned out, he didn't have to worry. Mary didn't ask how his holiday had gone. Once she was done talking about her own Christmas, she transitioned smoothly into complaining about how behind she was in history, which James joined in for. Pretty soon the whole car was talking about coursework, the subject of holidays forgotten. Their carriage was a bit less crowded than it had been leaving Hogwarts, as both Lily and Remus had abandoned them for prefect patrols, but the car was still incredibly noisy and bursting with chatter from 3 different conversations by the time they pulled into Hogsmeade. Sirius didn't really consider the deft subject change until later that evening, when he and Mary were walking back to the common room after dinner. She was complaining about how she'd missed him, cuddling into his arm in a very affectionate way, and Sirius laughed and said without thinking, "Come on, you'll be able to visit me over summer holiday. Stop whinging." "Oh, right," Mary nodded. "You'll be with the Potters, won't you?" Sirius blinked. Yeah," he replied. Did James tell you that, or—" Mary flushed guiltily, as if realizing what she'd let slip. She looked down quickly, fidgeting with her entwined fingers. "Oh, no, I heard it from Lily." "Lily?" Sirius frowned, confused. How would Lily know he'd moved in with the Potters? Had James told her? "Yeah, she told me that you'd, left home." "Left home?" "Yeah, she said something happened with your family." Sirius bit back anger. "And how exactly did Evans come by that information?" Mary chewed on her lip. "Don't be mad, okay? She heard it from Severus." "Snape?" Mary nodded, and Sirius felt his stomach twist with nausea. It wasn't too difficult to imagine how Snape had found out. His parents' entire network of creepy Voldemort fanatics must have loved gossiping about him, about what a disgrace he was. Probably half the Slytherins in the school already knew, and of course bloody Snivellus would go running his mouth to anyone who listened. "Sirius, don't be angry," Mary pleaded, tugging on his arm. "I'm not," he lied, struggling to stifle the simmering rage. He didn't want to take his anger out on Mary. It wasn't her fault after all. No, Sirius knew exactly who to blame. That slimy little git. Thursday, 15th January, 1976. Their professors were trying to kill them. It was the only explanation. Sirius was pretty sure that McGonagall alone had assigned enough pages of reading to quite literally bury him alive. With owls just around the corner, the work was piling on in every class, until even Sirius had to admit defeat and crack open a textbook to revise, instead of continuing with his tried and tested method of leaving everything until the night before. He wasn't the only one feeling the strain. Every 5th year at Hogwarts was on edge, sporting dark circles and stumbling around the library with haggard expressions. The only person who actually appeared to be enjoying the ridiculous amount of schoolwork was Remus, who had accrued a steady stream of followers that were constantly asking for his help with their essays or incantations. He grumbled about it as if it were a headache, but his friends knew him well enough to catch the small, self-satisfied smile any time a student stopped him in the halls to ask a question. In fact, Mooney's little study club was growing so much that the marauders had taken to calling him Professor, which Sirius had to admit had a ring to it. And Remus obviously enjoyed teaching. Though he rolled his eyes at the nickname every time they used it, he could never stop his lips from quirking up automatically. Unfortunately, his SWAT lifestyle kept Remus incredibly busy. He hardly had any time for marauding, which Sirius couldn't help but feel a bit resentful about. Although Mooney made up for it by playing double agent whenever he was carrying out his prefect duties. Even though they teased him about it at the beginning of the year, it was actually quite useful having a prefect in your pocket. James and Sirius knew that they could get away with almost anything when Remus was on patrol, as he unabashedly played favorites and loyally maneuvered whoever he was patrolling with, usually Lily, in the opposite direction of whatever the marauders were up to. This gave them the opportunity to experiment with even more daring pranks and schemes, and Sirius felt unstoppable as he prowled the castle with James, hidden under the invisibility cloak. They had a few close calls with Filch, but that only made things more fun. They would return to the common room, breathless, laughing, high on adrenaline. When he wasn't making mischief or resenting his professors, Sirius spent most of his time on the Quidditch pitch. Their first match against Slytherin had resulted in a tie, which meant James was whipping the team into a frenzy as they competed for the cup. They practiced twice as often every week, and Potter dragged Sirius out of bed every morning at daybreak to force him on a jog. He complained about it, but privately, Sirius was grateful for the distraction. He was grateful for any distraction. The Slytherins had been just as nasty as ever, but there was a new glint in their eyes when they looked at him. By the end of his first week back, it seemed as though the entire school knew he'd been kicked out. Which was fine. Sirius didn't give a toss about his family, or about what other people thought about his family. As far as he was concerned, they were dead to him. Dead and buried, deep in the recesses of his mind. But he still had nightmares, dreams that left him screaming himself awake. They dissipated like dust when he woke, leaving only hazy impressions. Black ink pouring down his throat, hissing so loud and horrible that it made his ears bleed. Pain, always pain. He'd started casting silencing spells over his bed after the first night that James shook him awake, brow furrowed in concern, stomach turning pity in the back of his eyes. It didn't matter. They were just dreams. Besides, Sirius had plenty of other things to think about. Endless essays, pages of reading, stacks of assignments, plots for pranks, Quidditch strategies, and of course, there was Mary. She'd said she missed him over holiday, and she hadn't been kidding. It seemed like she was always cuddling up to him, throwing a cheeky smile over her shoulder as she tugged him into an empty classroom, a broom cupboard, once the girls' loos on the 4th floor. Sirius wasn't sure exactly how fast things were meant to progress when you had a girlfriend. He'd heard how some of the older boys talked, of course, but no one ever actually explained the timeline when you were supposed to move on from just snogging to, well, other things. Sirius was ready for other things. At least, he was pretty sure that he was. It was certainly growing frustrating, spending long minutes with Mary pressed up against him, sighing in his ear, kissing his neck, and then hopping off his lap and bidding him goodnight with a peck on the cheek before scampering off to her own bed. She'd taken to trailing her finger up his legs sometimes when they kissed, and Sirius was beginning to wish that she'd just get it over with and touch him. Of course, the thought of him touching her was a much more intimidating matter, and the primary reason that Sirius hadn't taken any steps to hurry things along. While he'd certainly gotten the hang of the whole snogging thing, Sirius still felt a bit clueless about what he was meant to do with his hands. Sometimes Mary would huff in frustration and move his fingers to her waist, or her back, or her thigh, and he would grin sheepishly, so lost in the sensation of whatever she'd been doing to him that he'd forgotten he was supposed to be reciprocating. He knew he'd have to figure it out eventually, but Sirius was mostly content to let Mary take the lead, following whatever pace she set. That was how he found himself, one Thursday night, tucked into an alcove behind a tapestry, with Mary straddling his lap. They'd been at it for a solid 15 minutes when she pulled back, breathing quickly. "Sirius," she whispered, close to his ear. It was quite dark behind the tapestry, so he couldn't see the expression on her face, though he could certainly picture it. "Do you want to touch me?" Yeah." He swallowed, throat slightly dry. "Yeah, I do." He wasn't entirely sure what she was asking, but he'd learned that when Mary said stuff like that while they were kissing, she usually already had something fairly specific in mind. Sure enough, her arms snaked away from where they'd been wrapped around his neck, and she leaned back slightly. He could feel her hands fumbling between them. What are you... Oh. Bloody hell, she was unbuttoning her blouse. Sirius felt a surge of panic, coupled with heated excitement, as Mary's fingers moved, surprisingly deft in the dark. She reached out and grabbed his hand, placing it on her chest. Sirius swallowed again, and the panic resurfaced. What the fuck was he meant to do? He was forced abruptly to confront the fact that he hadn't the faintest clue how to go about feeling up a girl's... her... tits, Sirius thought in a state of mild shock. I'm touching her tits. He squeezed experimentally. They were very soft, and rather squishier than he'd imagined. Sort of like a water balloon, but warmer. Much warmer. Mary giggled quietly, leaning forward so that her forehead pressed against his. Here, like this. He was just beginning to feel like he was onto something. Mary had started making a sort of soft sighing noise in the back of her throat, when voices drifted down the hall. Lacewing flies, dew from a field of clover, seawater, and... Sirius sucked in a breath, trying to keep from laughing. He recognized that voice, the familiar way it trailed off as its owner got lost in thought, brow furrowed, lip poking out. "Oh, come on, Remus," came Lily Evans's voice, sounding as if it were just a few feet down from the tapestry. "This is fourth-year stuff." "I know, but I can never... Wait, did you hear that?" "What? Shh!" Sirius held his breath, heart pounding as he listened to Remus's footsteps draw closer and closer until... Lumos! The tapestry was ripped back, light flooding from Lupin's outstretched wand. "Shit! Mary!" Lily gasped. "Moony!" Sirius said, grinning sheepishly. "What are you two doing?" Lily demanded, hands on her hips. Sirius couldn't help but winking, smirking as he said, "Can't guess, Evans?" Mary was still halfway on his lap, frantically buttoning her shirt back up. "We ought to give you both detention," Lily said sternly, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, be nice, Lily." Mary smiled, rolling her eyes. "Everyone does it. Just a bit of fun." "Well, as it is the first time," Lily sighed. "Come on, we're heading back to the tower now anyway." 5 more minutes?" Sirius teased, just to see Lily's face flush with embarrassment. Mary laughed, slapping his arm playfully. "Bad boy!" she giggled, finishing the final button on her shirt. "Come on, it's not like anything else is happening tonight." Mary and Lily walked slightly ahead of them on the way back to the common room, giggling and whispering, sneaking glances back at Sirius every so often. He tucked his hair behind his ear, walking with a slight swagger and winking whenever they looked back. He tried to catch Remus's eye too, with a knowing smile. James would have been nudging him all the way back to their room, wiggling his eyebrows and grinning cheekily. But Remus stared straight ahead, an irritated frown on his face, as he walked. By the time they got back to the common room, Sirius was beginning to feel like he'd done something wrong. Had he offended Remus in some way? The boy continued to frown as they all got ready for bed, a stormy expression behind his eyes. "All right, Moony?" Sirius asked when they'd climbed into their beds and Remus still hadn't spoken. "Yeah," Remus replied gruffly. He rolled over, putting his back to Sirius, and that was that.